Minuilam Makwait. Welcome everybody to Learning with CA at SRTRC 57 Speaker Series. I'm your co-host today, Ted Cadwallader, along with my great friend, my brother, Tom Quatin, and our pal, Stephanie Johnson, Sweetlatan Tanat. You won't see her on camera today because Stephanie has COVID. And so she's behind screens managing stuff for us and enjoying our guests today. As always, I will turn it over to Tsongkwatan, following the protocols of this territory, to welcome everyone and to open the house and invite our ancestors to join us.
I nasli ko na siya Nicola Michael I Latakat an Swyam I an Squelquel at Tanaquel. I gasiam nasli ko na imistuch ta siais I Lachant ta siais titelname ta Tanaquel I Titlam ta Stitlam I Quaquel stuch ta muck them. I'm going to start off by sharing some blessing words and a song to, like my relative said, to open us in a good way and call forward anything that is willing to help us in our work today. So, hi, Zap. CM Nawat Imashtuch Tama Dem Hike Neat Ali Hike Atta House Squale Hike Atta I Mit Tamach Tamach Stem Yatana Atana Quail Mach Quail Needsap Tatwimet at Nawa Amastal Aquitha Squalaman Eight Owatal Tathema Size Quam Stoch to Squalaman Holnuch Tat Atlat Eta Salit Equam E Lachen Tanashwala Quasta Newet Kakyaut Equam E Lachen Stoch Tana Skikel Swalaqua Haichka Qua Tana Tama Atan Aquel to Maxwell Nawash Quam Sata Salit Haichka. Me halital. Like that, like that.
Hachka, thank you, my brother. We I was thinking about today and how we have our TRC 57 speaker series as our URL, and I have this little book, and inside this little book are all 92 calls to action and are all articles from the UN Declaration. 40 all 46 articles in there, and I'm just thinking it's just this little book, a great place to start. So if folks are just joining us for the first time, it's this big. And our call to action 57, we call upon federal, provincial, territorial, and municipal governments to provide education to public servants on the history of Aboriginal peoples, including the history, legacy of residential schools, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, treaties and Aboriginal rights, Indigenous law, and Aboriginal Crown relations. This will require skills-based training in intercultural competency, conflict resolution, human rights, and anti-racism. And with our guests that are our partners at UBC Press and Vancouver Island Regional Libraries, this is a perfect fit with our guest today, Dr. Nicoll Yahgulanaas from UBC. She's a curator and associate professor of museum and visual anthropology at UBC, author of The Marvelous Real, Art for Mexico, 1926 to 2011, and editor of Bodies of Enchantment, Puppets from Asia, Europe, Africa, and America. Has curatorial positions at Horniman Museum in London, the Royal Pavilion Art Gallery and Museums in Brighton, and author of Mischief Making, Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas, Art and the Seriousness of Play. And we are so pleased to have her join us today. I was just talking with Nicola before we started and saying, I've been around Indigenous art and artists my whole life, and yet this work still makes me feel uncomfortable and a bit unsettled, and I'm not sure why yet, but hopefully we'll talk about its purpose in doing exactly that and how our artist goes about doing it. So welcome, Nicola. The floor is yours. I'm so pleased you could join us.
Thank you all very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you, Stephanie, Ted, and a special thanks to Smukwa for that beautiful song and blessing. That was really very, very special. And so, yes, I'm going to share my screen, hopefully.
Hopefully, we'll see.
You tell me how it goes.
Okay.
Let's see.
Success.
I am just going to, let's see, let me get... we'll get a presenter view. Okay. And then I'm hoping to give you, can you see, what can you see now?
That is beautiful. It's got the book cover, Learning with Syeyutsus, and we just see the slide. Yeah.
Now, do you want to see the speaker?
I moved my camera.
I can move us down here if you wish, or you tell me what you prefer.
I've moved my camera off to another screen because I get 3 screens to work from, and so I'm good. So
would you like to see the speaker, me, i.e., or would you prefer?
That would be great.
Yeah. Okay, let me see. Why is this jumping around? Stop jumping around. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you should. So you're seeing a portion of my screen. There we are. Let's get the text sorted out. So you can just see the slide and little me and you, Ted. Is that right?
Yes. I don't see you on my screen, but it looks, I can manage it. If you just jump
Okay.
into your presentation. We
Okay.
can figure
Great.
it out.
And do shout out if for at any point the slides disappear or something happens. So firstly, I would like to, as in addition to thanking you all, I would like to acknowledge that I'm zooming to you from here on the unceded territory of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people. And so I'd like to say hi to the Musqueam, to thank them graciously for allowing me and my gaggle of boys to live and work here on this land, this beautiful land, yet a land very so scarred by invasive species of different forms. And that idea of the invasive species in different forms is really encapsulated in this particular visual. I'm very driven by visuals. They speak to me deeply, and I took note of Ted's notion of feeling unsettled with regard to some of Yahgulanaas's works, and I hope, yeah, we can have a deeper conversation about that. But I wanted to begin by acknowledging my gratitude for being here in relationship to showing you this brilliant graphic by the Tahltan comic artist, Vancouver-based Cole Pauls, which was reproduced in his award-winning 2022 collection, Kwandur. Now, the reason I've chosen this image is not because of the importance of recognizing, to use Wisner's term, survivance. So the strength and resilience of the Indigenous peoples of this area, but in particular, I'm thinking of Musqueam from my positionality here, but also because as a point of entry into the marvelous and mischievous realm of Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas, aka the Haida manga guy, who signs his work with a fish-like flourish. So Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas, MNY, or as he self-designated himself early on, the Haida manga guy. He's also been known as Yaku and others before. So why is there a connection with Cole Pauls? Well, in an interview in 2021 with Candida Rifkin, she asked Cole, can you tell us a little bit more about your distinctive style? Where does it come from and what has influenced it? And Cole said that when he was 14, he said, I took a trip down to Vancouver. I visited the Vancouver Art Gallery, and it was on my way out as I walked through the gift shop that I discovered Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas's Red, a Haida manga. It had just come out and it blew my mind because it was an Indigenous comic, a purely Indigenous comic. And I'd always wanted to see something like that, but I'd also always wanted to make my own. So seeing someone who had successfully done it really shaped my brain into being, whoa, I could do this too. And so he did. But we'll come back to Red a little bit later, but this is just an example of Cole's brilliant work, some of his Indigenous futurism, just these little prompts to, if you haven't seen or engaged with Cole's comics, they're fantastic. So Indigenous futurism for Cole, but just a little taste of that before we actually journey back in time through Yahgulanaas's art to the beginning. But before we do that journeying together, first I've got to shed a little tear because I'm really very sad that Michael can't be with us today. For those of you that may know him, or familiar with him, he is just an incredible life force. He's a knowledge holder, knowledge keeper, an incredible sharer, a seasoned and superb raconteur, somebody bursting with stories, and of course, an incessant doodler as well. And so, unfortunately, we were both invited, and I didn't know whether I should accept without him, but he encouraged me, sort of pushed me forward, said, no, you must go. But anyway, I sort of been keeping my eye on his Instagram to see what he's up to. So I thought I'd share with you about what he's been up to of late. So this is a recent Instagram telling us that he's working on the Museum of Contemporary Art in Toronto he's got a large scale commission. But he also said he took a break. I'm taking a break to celebrate the Haida and BC successes, a first in Canada. And then I'm back to painting the canvases for updates to subscribe. So I just wanted to take a moment, just a little break in this, just to celebrate as well in acknowledging this momentous celebration victory, to call it a victory maybe, but the importance that 10 days ago, so on the 14th of this month, there was the formal recognition and signing legislation between the BC government and the Haida of the Haida's nation's Aboriginal title over the archipelago of Haida Gwaii. So that's fantastic. So huge round of applause. So I'm all sure you're all sort of clapping there in your own spaces, your own little digital worlds. So yeah, I'm glad you took a break, Michael, anyway. And yeah, this is what he is working on at the moment. So just to give you a peek into the productivity and the energy that's going on for Toronto. So he's currently with his studio. So he's got a gaggle up there in the top left-hand corner. You'll see some of his workers. They've got this large-scale project. They're working on the Dalcatli diaries, a set of 28 large-scale canvases, and which is going to be in an exhibition that on Michael solo show at MOCA in September of this year. But the title of the works, Dalcatli, actually resonates with the place or the land from where he's from. So Michael was born in Prince Rupert in 1954, and he grew up on the fishing village of Masset on Haida Gwaii, near the Dalcatli Wildlife Sanctuary. So surrounded by water, and I think this is really, really important. Actually, the image from the front of Mischief making, which is a detail behind me, and also behind Ted, is taken from sinking into the ocean. So there are lots of water imagery that we see sort of resonating through Michael's work, and we'll pick up on that a little bit later. And so he was born and grew up on Masset on Haida Gwaii, and he was always drawing and doodling. As a boy, he was an avid reader, not only of comics and cartoons, but other literature too. And his mum, Babs Hagerman Yahgulanaas, who I was sort of in conversation with, well, I was just asking her as we were sort of watching Michael in a restaurant, scribbling away, doodling away, you know, what he was like as a child. And she recalls that he was just exactly the same. And no surface was immune to his doodles and scribbles. And she even remembers, you know, his bedroom door was completely covered, the walls of his bedroom. And so, yeah, what a brilliant mother to be so open and liberal to allow that creative expression to continue. And it's very, very true that whenever you're in Michael's company, as I've mentioned, he constantly has some kind of drawing implement to hand. And this is just a little example of some of his sort of doodles. So for quite a while, he was on the board of the Christensen Fund, and yeah, and you can see what he does when he's in board meetings, probably, if not bored, just sort of multitasking. And on the right is a work called Haida Codex, where he had charged himself every day as he made a 20-minute ferry journey to doodle or draw with watercolors direct. And you can see the immediacy of his style that we come to see. If you're not familiar with Michael's work, you'll see it as I move through my slides, in terms of that fluidity of movement that really speaks to a kind of watery existence. His preferred medium is watercolors, although he is known to work in multiple different mediums, from large-scale metal works to the collages to woven works as well in between. So he was always doodling, but by his early 20s, so this is a quick whip through his career. But by his early 20s, his comics from, you know, childhood cartooning had become part of a political activism on Haida Gwaii. And in fact, his first published comic was a full-length comic, was published in 1977. So he would have been 23 years old, so young. And it's incredibly creative, and it was produced for the Island Protection Society, which had been established in 1974 by Haida and non-Indigenous activists on Haida Gwaii to safeguard the archipelago's natural heritage from the devastating destruction caused by resource extractive industries in the area. So there were 1,000 copies printed, which is a good substantial print run even in this day and age, and circulated, and they were out of that they were successful. It was successful. It was this campaign to block the transport of Exxon Valdez crude oil from Alaska through the Hecate Straits, which of course separate Haida Gwaii from the Canada's sort of mainland. And yeah, it was successful in actually achieving that. And so yeah, still very opportune. So what you have within, sorry, I'm just trying to move this out of my way a minute. Yeah. Oh, no, it's going to have a mind of its own. Let's see. I got somebody there anyway. So so within that you have these very detailed black and white cartoons that are full of humor and politics, and they depict the apocalyptic effects of oil spillage. And of course we know what happened with the Exxon Valdez, thankfully not on the shores of Haida Gwaii, but the politics, they depicting these apocalyptic effects of oil spillage for the natural environment. So in this particular one, you've got, how do you get this stuff off? Sorry, my slide's been clipped. It says you don't, not that you do. So moving on. And so throughout the 1970s and 80s, so in his 20s and 30s, he was producing prolifically. I mean, he's a prolific cartoonist, producing, circulating, printing in largely local media, satirical cartoons that often depicted government officials as blind men, you know, sort of fumbling around oil polluted or logged environments, wearing blacked out, you know, glasses, and accompanied by insidious industry representatives. So real fat cats. So you can see images here. And of course, blindness as a motif, you know, speaks really to this idea of the undiscerning, you know, sort of not the support of the oil and timber industries to the detriment of the environment and its interconnected marine and ecologies. Now, these wonderful images are, if you're interested, are reproduced, or they're gathered together in Old Growth, which is Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas. It's quite a substantial, in fact, I've got a copy here. I haven't, oh no, you can't see me. Hang on, let me see if I can you see me? Yeah, can we see us? Sorry, how do
we can see you depending on where the audience put their cameras to see us. I've got us across the bottom of the screen, so I can see you down there.
Okay, so I don't need to mess around then too much. You can see, you can do your own seeing.
We can
you see
if you want to put a link to that, we can drop that in the
I
chat.
can do that afterwards. Yeah.
Okay.
It's a nice substantial book, but this gives you an idea of the prolific outpourings from the 70s through, well, throughout the 20th century of his cartooning work, his cartoons and his comics, and very much chronicling, you know, for over 30 years, the history and politics of Haida Gwaii and resource extractive industries. Let's see if we can move forward. And so art and protest. So we've got the 70s, we're going to whip through the 80s just very, very quickly in terms of the 80s marked, to some extent, a turning point. In many different ways, but particularly with regard to the art of protest, and that's the Athli Gwaii protest in particular that I would speak to. This was a conflict over sustainable resource use. Some of you may have been around or recall it. where the conflict over the depletion of old growth on Haida, on Haida lands, and the world watched literally as proud, defiant Haida. Some elders that you can see here in the image above, in ceremonial blankets, were arrested one after another for blocking this sort of quite a remote logging road on Lyle Island or Atligwai. And here, sorry, I should point here, this is a young Michael Nicoll Yahgulanaas. He was one of over 70 Atligwai protesters who were arrested a number of times. They were charged with criminal contempt of court at the Supreme Court of BC in Prince Rupert. And however, their sentences were suspended almost immediately. And Yahgulanaas explained to me it's because there was an incredible degree of public support by citizens and influential individuals across BC as well. But also, for example, high-profile artist protest at the same time. In joining the Atligwai protests, we had Bill Reid putting down his tools and refusing to work on the Black Canoe, the Spirit of Haida Gwaii commission that was for the Canadian Chancery, so the Canadian Embassy in Washington, DC. So of course, it becomes a very sort of internationally sort of spotlighted event. And out of, let's see, move forward. Out of this, these struggles, you have this resolution, this watershed moment whereby the Gwaii National Park Reserve and the Haida Gwaii Heritage Site is created and ratified by the Haida Nation and the Government of Canada in 1993. So as a cooperatively managed conservation area. Another shout out for this book on the left, edited by a dear close friend, Nicoll of the Haida Gwaii Museum. Again, excuse me, I can put in a link to that. So we've whipped through the 70s and 80s, or had little, not really whipped through them, but just had little spotlights on those. Sorry, I'm going to have a sip of water. Hopefully my voice will last. So in the 70s and 80s, so Yahgulanaas was working as a councillor in the Haida Nation, and he was also producing and circulating cartoons, so critical political commentary on environmental issues and other sort of more daily things that were happening. But at the same time, there was a general resurgence happening within on Haida Gwaii among different artists groups coming together. So for example, Michael and also Kutsangans, Robert Davidson, Idansu, James Hart, and other artists, they came together to work on an array of communal projects that included carving totem poles, designing canoes, working on, ceremony, great halls. And it was really, there was this dramatic change taking, well, maybe not dramatic, but certainly change taking place because of the Haida's resistance and constant protest against and a strong hold onto their sovereignty. So through this resistance and resilience, with the arrival of the new millennium, Yahgulanaas made a decision, with change happening, that he was going to move out of the politics, out of the political sphere, so out of being a Haida councillor, into working as an illustrator, and to devote himself to art on a full-time basis. And so this was probably the last sort of large-scale sort of carving project that he took part in. Which was the Respect to Bill Reid pole at the UBC Museum of Anthropology. And he quipped, better to move into the politics of art than into the art of politics. However, as we will see, these elements, so art politics, remain inextricably bound up in his practice. Move on. But he had a very specific idea. It wasn't, I'm just going to become a full-time artist. He was actually thinking about how his art practice was going to develop. So he said, after 2 decades of political service, I turned to art, wanting to build graphic novels that would tell stories different than the ones we are served up on the book and magazine shelves. I didn't want it to be part of those traditions, but I longed for something that felt more truthful. I had to innovate. Actually, this is I'll just mention the large watercolor on the right, the War of the Blink. It's based on a shared Haida and Heiltsuk oral history, and in 2017 it was made into, this particular watercolor was made into a multi-part graphic novel. And he did innovate indeed. He innovated by forging forward with this particularized, highly distinctive, aesthetic graphic form he called Haida manga. And Haida manga proper really debuted with this book called A Tale of Two Shamans. So this is the image on the left is one of the images within the book. And it's a graphic novel, and it's based on the reformulation of an old Haida parable, separated into the 3 regional dialects. And so with these Haida, sorry, I'll just move forward. It was republished in 2018. So this is the 2001 novel. And this is, I've always believed, but Michael will not be pinned down, but I always think that this is him. This is him as shaman. And this is the 2018 edition. And I think what's really interesting in terms of the 2018 edition, and perhaps thinking more broadly in Ted's framing of the calls to action, is the advances that have been made in language revitalization that are indexed in this particular edition. So in this edition, you've got the commitment to language revitalization. So, and Michael actually dedicates the book to all the students of the Haida language who've committed themselves to revitalization. He explains that while English language version remains exactly the same, unaltered, true to its 2001 telling, the parallel narratives told in Old Masset, Skidegate and Alaskan dialects have been updated. And in fact, he talks about the way in which so he collaborated with language scholars, elders, fluent speakers to imbue the text with new and updated, more precision in phonology, morphology and syntax. And this is part of his dedication. So that's the sort of textual side of it. But also there's the visual element that's so very, very distinctive. So as I've said, this is the emergence, if you like, of Haida manga proper. This is a departure from No Tankers Tanks and the illustrations that you saw in the 70s and 80s that followed a very sort of Euro-American aesthetic design form in terms of the way in which the sequential series were presented, so classic comic form, and the lines. If you're thinking about a comic, a Euro-American or Western comic form, we think of these sort of linear panels, they're called panels, that sit side by side, that are framed with the action and dialogue within the frames. And what Michael did is he basically decided to embrace the watery fluidity of what is often referred to as form line. You may have come across form line as a descriptor for these very distinctive black, bold, continuous shapes within Indigenous Northwest Coast, Northern Northwest Coast design practices, both historical and contemporary. But he resists this idea of terming them form line and embraces the idea of frame line. So Michael, departing from comics, move forward, please. There we are. So departing from comics within that Euro-American tradition, he embraced this idea of a much more fluid frame line in which action could take place. So again, this is the Heiltsuk Haida narrative, A War of the Blink, where you can see these watery worlds and this immense action, this oral narrative coming to life and erupting across the page. And in fact, it isn't read from left to right, as a Euro-American comic form would be, but you read up and down and through the center. And so this is a real innovation and departure. And it's really, his ideas are captivated. And I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but there's this one 2011 ink cartoon in his archive that really captures the way in which he resists a Euro-North American geometric comic format. He says that they're unfitting for Haida-inspired narratives. You know, Haida history, Haida time is not perceived as linear, progressive, cumulative. It's much more complex. So it's really that idea of disrupting the linear presentation of time, the sequence of time and space, as well as rejecting also from the Haida perspective, the language of form line, preferring this idea of the frame line being conceptualized as this wave that swells and breaks and ripples across the surface of the paper. But why manga? Well, he said he chose manga because of the literal translation of the word, which is imagery without, without restrictions. He said, I use manga because I was speaking primarily to a North American audience and saying, this is not a comic book. This is not your regular run-of-the-mill comic book. This is about, it's got storylines that are from elsewhere. And in this particular case, Haida. So this again, after A Tale of Two Shamans, you have The Voyage of the Black Ship, actually a very Indigenous futuristic narrative. I won't dwell on that, but again, about resource extraction and the aid of a pink girl, a small blue bear, a magical supernatural being, and a flying canoe for ridding the world of toxicity. This is just a slide to give you a snapshot of his prolific output in graphic novel form, you know, including within there, we've got The Last Voyage of the Black Ship, Tale of Two Shamans, bringing you right up to date with Judge, which was released in 2023, while I was actually writing Mischief Making. So this image is included in Mischief Making. It was Michael in the studio. Go back. There we are. Michael in his studio working, just to give you an idea of his process. So working on this huge mock-up that was eventually transformed into this latest commissioned book and immense watercolor sketch that we'll talk about. Hopefully we'll have time to look at if we don't run out of time. So, but at the same time as he was producing these very colorful Haida manga narratives, there was also the pen and ink. Just to give you an idea of the extent of and the dynamism of his imagery, this is from an extended series that he produced based on an oral narrative, an epic oral narrative that has multiple stories about Raven, that inveterate trickster of the Haida and beyond worlds. And this is a story of Raven gone fishing. But again, just to show you how you've got the form line and this idea of the frame line, and you've got characters that are popping out, you know, sort of breaking through the gutter, etc. And just again, this is just an imagery to show what has been designated form line. That's actually a very sort of colonial Eurocentric term devised by Bill Holm, an art historian in the mid 20th century, but that's stuck. It's sort of quite a resilient term, but why Michael pushes against it. But this idea of how he utilizes is inspired not only by Indigenous or Haida and his lineage oral narratives, but also material forms, you know, going back to works, historical works or ancestral belongings that really inspire and sort of stimulate his creativity. So here we have this one: deconstruct the box, extract any meaning, any kind of meaning, as long as it's relevant. Bang. That is one of Michael's. And so as you saw in the last slide, Raven is quite a stock character in different ways appearing in Michael's oeuvre. If you dip into his archive, at one stage in the 90s, he was known as Rockin' Raven. He is a raven, he is a trickster, he's mischievous, hence partly inspired the title of Mischief Making. He identifies with Raven in many different ways, and Raven has formed a large part of the narratives that he's told. And again, this is just an image again to give you an idea of where here we see Haida manga, where the raven reveals that time in space is an active, twisting and expanding vitality, you know, it's zooming through space, you know, breaking up these frame lines to enable you to sort of peek into what lies beyond. But another bird that's really helped catapult Michael into the realm of manga, or into the realm of manga readers, was little Duk Duk Daya. And some of you may be familiar with this beautiful, come back. This little book that actually was published in 2008. And initially, Michael's graphic novels received much more broader recognition in Asia, and especially in Japan and Korea, where they have a sort of a hardcore manga or manhwa reading audience, but they really took off. He was recognized there rather than proliferating and being recognized here in North America. And this is not uncommon. It's not just for manga-esque or comic-esque. And this is certainly a whole debate in the area that needs discussion about recognition outside before those that, you know, where you are actually value your culture and your brilliance. So this particular book was first published in Japanese, and it was published in Japanese in 2005, and it was called Hachidori Hitsoshizuku, A One Drop of Water from a Hummingbird. And it was written by a Japanese, so it's based on a Quechua myth or oral narrative, and it was written by a Japanese cultural anthropologist and environmentalist. And it was published by the second large publishing house in Japan. And as Tanaka notes, this little book really captured the hearts of the Japanese youth. It made it a complete smash hit, selling over 30,000 copies. So that's really a substantial number. If any of you have published anything, it's like, ooh, I'd like to sell 30,000 copies. So the English edition, so that was the Japanese edition, and then the English edition followed in 2008, and this is the front cover, and it was illustrated by, of course, illustrated by Yahgulanaas, but with a foreword by Wangari Maathai, and an afterword on universal responsibility by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So both Nobel Peace Prize winners. And I have to say, it's possibly one of my favorites of Michael's. It's different, like its aesthetic actually, I think it's because of the materiality as well. I do enjoy the materiality of the small version. There's also a children's version of Flight of a Hummingbird. So rather than having those really intense Baroque full lines, it is a much sort of simplified and exquisite and stylized narrative visual storytelling. And so it's in black, white and red, and you've got these expanses of negative space and minimalistic text. And so, yeah, as I say, it's quite different from some of Michael's other works in terms of their excessive baroqueness. And this is the story of a forest on fire. And so it's called A Parable for the Environment, The Little Flight of the Hummingbird. The forest is on fire. Apologies of those of you that know it, but it's always worth remembering. I never tire of this story. And all the animals are fleeing. So all the large animals, so you've got beaver here, frog, etc. And they're fleeing from the fire, this roaring forest fire, with the exception of little Duk Duk Daya, the hummingbird. And she's flying to a body of water, picking up a little bead of water, flying back and dropping it on the fire. Just one little drop, one little bead of water at a time. And the big bear turns around in the storyline and says, little Duk Duk Daya, what the hell are you doing? And she turns around and she says, I'm doing what I can. Ooh, conscious of time, doing what I can. And really is a story for parable for the environment. The scenes from the hummingbird has been converted into, I'd say, a children's book. It's also an animation that you can find on YouTube by Chris After, who is a NFB award-winning Haida animator and nephew of Yahgulanaas. And if you look on Michael's website, the Flight of the Hummingbird opera has just started its tour again. It was interrupted initially by the pandemic. And I'm going to probably have to end very soon here. But a year after Hummingbird appeared, we have the emergence of Red. So many of you may be familiar with Red, a Haida manga, based on one of Michael's lineage stories about Red, the main protagonist, who you see pictured here. And this just gives you, it was the most ambitious of his watercolors to date then in 2008 when he was working on it in his studio. This gives no idea of the phenomenal size of it. It consists of, oops, hang on, it's got a mind of its own today. Return, it's telling me, move. 15 feet in length, almost 5 meters in length. It's monumental. It's a watercolor. It's beautiful. Each of these little panels here is 1 page. And there are 108 pages. And if you cut apart and put the pages together, you get the full watercolor book. There's a YouTube. I'll put the link in as well, whereby you can make the mural yourself if you buy 2 paper copies. So you have this immense watercolor form. And as you can see, again, it resonates with some of the earlier, earlier works. I won't wait there. And again, so that was Michael's, we go back here, return. One of Michael's ancestors, Albert Edward Earnshaw, this is a bentwood box that we've seen earlier in the slides, 19th century in the Museum of Anthropology's collection. I'm whipping forward. This again is an Earnshaw work that's in the Seattle Art Museum. And this was the Seattle Art Museum commission. And it tells it's a frontlet, it's exquisite, the abalone. And here you can see the sea monster, or the skin of a sea monster that is being worn over the protective skin of the sea monster, which is worn by one of Earnshaw and Yahgulanaas' family clan members when they were fishing in deep water. And it protected them. And here you have managed to catch a black whale. And this image forms the centerpiece of Carpe Fin. As I say, another incredible, monumental watercolor work that again has been transformed into a graphic novel, Carpe Fin. And that's just really to give you an idea of the scale and the size. And I am just now going to whip through the last of my slides in the last 2 minutes to give time for us to have a chat. But again, just to give you an idea of the scale, the latest work, Jaja Haida Manga, was a commission from the Humboldt Forum based on critiquing their colonial collections. They have the oldest collections of Northwest Coast material, probably in the world. And during the 19th century, this is a representation of the director, Adolf Bastian, issuing the directive, I need a totem pole. Museums in Europe were desperate for totem poles. And so Michael's Jaj, it's a graphic novel that actually departs from purely oral history. What you have is a storyline that draws on historical archival sources, weaves them together with a fictional dimension. This is just to give you an idea of this particular panel. I Need a Totem Pole is here on this drawing and here on the overall composition, to give you again this notion of scale. And this is Michael in Berlin explaining to the curator what it's all about. And again, we see resonances and references within of different works. And Michael's works are not, as I've mentioned, they're not restricted to graphic forms. We have metal, we have large, heavy metal in Vancouver. We have the first work I ever encountered, a car, which is now in Calgary, a bone box, always deconstructing the boxes. And I have to say Hawa in Haida, extension to my Haida friends, and to all of you, thank you so much. And I, apologize for the froggy voice at the beginning and the whiz at the end. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, if I can do that. Let's see. Stop sharing.
My goodness.
Wow, that was a whiz, wasn't it?
Wow.
Oh,
I was as I was reading the book too, I was just looking at every once in a while you would in the book you would show the scale of some of those pieces of art, and I was amazed and tried to wrap my head around, if I was creating a piece of art, I've got all sorts of art surrounding me here, and I'm talking sticks and drums and things like that, but those are massive. And just to think in that scale, and also in that detail within that scale, was just amazing. Thank you for sharing this book, Nicola. It was absolutely stunning. And of course, you went at high speed through it all too. So our audience here, if you really get, I highly recommend it. I said to Nicola before, it makes me uncomfortable, and I think that's part of it. The way that my old mind tries to wrap itself around new ways of seeing things that are, they're hints of old ways of seeing things that he brings forward into new ways of understanding it. Our audience can get 20% off from our friends at UBC Press on this book as well. It's a beautiful book. I like the size of it, I like the feel of it, and the artwork is absolutely stunning, and Michael's story as well. When I finally got to the part where he was working in metal in it, towards the end, I went, wait a minute, he's gone from into sculpture, and he must be an amazing man to spend some time around and listen to him, how he thinks about the world.
Yeah, definitely.
I just see thanks and inspiring and fascinating and amazing talk, and definitely want to learn more from others. And we had Patrick join us from Haida too. So it was nice to have somebody from Michael's homeland. So again, Patrick, thank you for joining us here. There is a Hawa so much. Just a note, I'm going to read it out loud, Patrick. Just a note, my colleague and I were given permission by Michael to adapt the little hummingbird into a puppet show up here in Haida. We work at the library and perform it for kids up here regularly. Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Well, I might have to follow up on that, because
for sure. Carrie, thank you for putting the link in there to the book. When I turn to Tzomquat and Nicola, if you could put a link in there too, if somebody is looking for access to one of the books that you'd mentioned in here earlier.
Yeah, maybe should I do that now, or
yeah,
do you
sure,
want
that would be good. Yeah.
I don't know if I can do it sort of offhand, because I've got to maybe could provide a few. So the Atligwai, yeah.
If
to me, and I can send it out after the fact as well.
Okay, yeah, if you just email it to Stephanie and she can add it there.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I'll connect you with Patrick as well. He's a friend of mine.
Oh, lovely. Yeah. Yeah, we've been having watch parties at different libraries up and down the coast too for our series, and it's they've been a terrific partner, the Vancouver Regional Library.
Yeah, this is a very beautiful series, and
thank you
very much. I feel really very honored to have been able to participate
Oh, it's a
default.
you've been an amazing guest, and thank you so much for
you.
bringing that. I th- I don't know the exact word for it, but there's an inspiration, there's a life inside the artwork there, and you presented it beautifully. And as I was watching your cursor take on a mind of its own, I thought that was very reflective of the title of the book. So
Oh yeah.
okay.
No, I'm into energies. These
Mhm.
they're good energies. They're helping me to move through. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. But yeah, no, thank you very, very much.
I'm
And
going to turn it over to our brother again, Sampatan, to have any last words and close our house.
Nan san qua el ut eat all I tap cut and ima size tatel namet the tana quail at what quam stuck tan a squala when ye lamno tan ima size really brought great strength inside me to see the work that you guys have been undertaking and inspired me so much. You know, I always try to tell stories through my art, whether it's visual or whether it's through the drum. And it's helping me give me ideas on how I can walk through the world in a way that might spark other people around me. So thank you so much for your important work and for joining us here today. I'm going to share a bit of a song and I'm going to close our house. Yemnas Shwalakwa. Oh, 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 he. Oh, ho, oh, ho, oh, ho, oh, he. Oh, ho, oh, ho, oh, ho. Wo-ho, 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 Gachas Ashmain Heit. Heit I Messias at an aquil. Heit quam stuck to mark sweat. Needs up limit I mit squal qual etus huiem. Haitga. Mi latlamet tanashwala quaquisnem tatuk tanaquil latlamet tanashwala qua emer stuch to squale. Haitgasiem. War oh, war oh. War oh, war oh. War oh, oh, War oh, war oh, war oh. War oh, war oh, war oh, oh. Like that.
Thank you for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you next time. And thank you again, Nicola, for an amazing presentation. Stay with everyone.
Thank you.